I just left the president. It was a great interview. He said a lot about the economy, about the Iran war, about NATO. One thing that I'll leave you with, I said to him, Mr. President, you keep talking about the war like was. I said, is it over? He said, it's over. Join the whole interview tomorrow on Mornings with Maria, Fox Business 6.
Hello, welcome to a new edition of the Right Wing Populist Podcast. I am the Right Wing Populist. So today I want to talk about Trump. He apparently, according to a Fox News host, Trump is claiming that the war in Iran, it's over. The war is over, folks. The war is over. We won the war, according to the president. We won the war. It was a tremendous victory. We won. I'm not exactly sure what we won, but I guess we won, according to the president. So I want to discuss that, what that could mean. And I played the clip at the beginning of the episode, so you hear what the Maria said, the Fox News host. That's according to her. That's what the president is saying. So I want to talk about that, and maybe a little bit of the ramifications of the war itself politically, the fact that it has splintered people who are part of MAGA, people like Tucker Carlson, the beautiful Megyn Kelly, the wonderful Megyn Kelly. She looks so great, folks. Let's not talk about her attractiveness. I've done that plenty on the podcast. Just look at me. Anyway, let's not get sidetracked. But before we get into it all, I need you to do something, folks. It's so simple. It's so easy. A child could do it. A Democrat could do it. That's how easy it is. I need you to subscribe, whether on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever the heck you're listening to this beautiful podcast. Please subscribe. And if you're listening on the YouTubes, like and comment. It helps a great deal with the algorithm. I would so greatly appreciate it. So, yes, as you just heard at the beginning of the pod, according to Maria, whatever her last name is, don't know how to say it. According to the Fox News host, Trump is claiming that the war is over. And this is a good thing, and that's true. We'll see. Apparently, tomorrow there'll be an interview played with the president saying this. We don't have to just take her word for it. And I hope that's true, but, it does beg the question a couple things. Point number one, it's not clear to me that the war is literally over. Right now, we're still in a tentative ceasefire. Many of the issues have not been resolved, like the Strait of Hormuz. As folks who follow this podcast or follow the news in general know, Iran pretty much cut off traffic to the strait by threatening to attack any boats that pass through the strait. And that was supposed to be opened up when the ceasefire came into place, but unfortunately, Israel, our beautiful ally, our greatest ally, they tell us, Israel immediately violated the agreed-upon ceasefire that included Lebanon, and they kept bombing Lebanon. And by the way, CBS has reported, and CBS is run by Barry Weiss, who's a huge Israel supporter, so it's not like CBS is going to go out of the way to make Israel look bad. CBS reported that originally Lebanon was part of the ceasefire. That's what was agreed to by the United. In fact, the president of Pakistan, who mediated the ceasefire, in his official tweet that announced it, he mentioned Pakistan, and Israel violated the ceasefire immediately because, they love killing civilians. I understand this is it's a complicated situation because you have, people who are not friendly, Hezbollah, people who are not friendly to Israel, but, Lebanon, Israel's had Lebanon on its sights for decades, okay? It's not the first time Israel's been attacking Lebanon, and it's, a lot of people argue that Israel just wants to land in Lebanon. I don't want to get into it all because, there are differing opinions, and I'm not an expert on the situation with Lebanon specifically. But the point is, what's pretty much not disputable is Lebanon was originally included in the ceasefire, and Israel violated it. And because of that, one could argue they were never going to fully open it, but they had the pretext not to open it. Iran did not open the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, the Strait of Hormuz has not been fully opened. Now, the United States, in response, has now prevented Iran's oil from getting out effectively. Because you want to remember, folks, that we were letting Iran ship oil out of the strait, even though they were closing it off for other countries. The reason why we did that, the United States, was we wanted as much oil to get to the market as possible to try to keep oil prices as low as possible. Up until now, we were allowing Iranian oil to get out because, like I said, we wanted to keep prices lower. So by the administration blocking Iran now from letting the oil leave the strait, that hurts Iran economically, I suppose, but it's going to make oil prices go up. Energy prices are going to go up because the only reason we weren't doing this earlier is because we wanted to keep energy costs down as much as possible. So now that we're blocking the strait, gas prices will go up, at least in the short term. So, I mean, the idea that, us blocking the Strait of Hormuz for Iran is some great magic trick that we just discovered is the reason why we didn't do this at the beginning is because of the economic consequences. It just shows that we're desperate. And while tactically Iran has not won the war because we've decimated them, we've destroyed their infrastructure, we killed many of their government leaders. That's why they have all these new ones. I mean, make no mistake about it, we pummeled Iran. That's not even getting to the economic sanctions we had on before this war that totally weakened them. I mean, Iran is not in a good place as a country. Economically, they're very weak. Their infrastructure is very weak. We destroyed their navy. So I want to be very clear that tactically we've been very successful. The problem is strategically the United States has not been successful in winning this war because there's not been regime change. And, the administration doesn't like to talk about this now, but remember, folks, the day of the United States working with Israel, the day we started bombing Iran, Trump, he released a statement on Truth and all the social media platforms that it was reposted to. Trump was explicitly calling for the Iranian people to come out to the streets. He was calling for regime change. Make no mistake about it, this was about regime change. Okay, that's what this war was ultimately about. That's why we immediately killed all the leaders. Okay, we killed all of them. We killed the Ayatollah. And we were hoping for a quick victory, and it's been reported from the New York Times that the Israelis sold the president on this idea that, the war could go by very quickly because we would kill off the leaders. It would, Iran would not be able to, and they wouldn't close the strait. There would be an uprising by the people, and you'd have regime change very quickly. Or I think what the Israelis were hoping for was regime collapse. Or state collapse. That's what they were really hoping for. But at the very least, regime change. But that didn't happen. And the United States has been sort of flailing ever since because there was no long-term strategy here. Because there is no military solution to the problem. You're not going to seriously, in terms of ground troops, I think in terms of actual ground troops, I think there's 7,000 in terms of combat ready, actual ground. We have a lot of Navy troops there. In terms of actual ground troops, we have at most 10,000. The idea you're going to send off these people to try to take Karg Island or get the uranium, it's a joke. People have argued, and there is some reporting that suggests, remember the pilot that we had to rescue? There are credible reports that the reason why this pilot was even flying over Iran is because they were trying to start the operation to try to steal the uranium from Iran. And obviously it went poorly because he was shot down and we had to rescue him. And I don't think it's a coincidence that shortly after the United States was desperate for a ceasefire because I think even though we successfully saved the pilot, we recovered the pilot, we rescued the pilot, I think Trump realized if you're going to really commit to having troops on the ground, there's going to be a lot of problems. There's going to be a lot of deaths. The idea that it's going to go smoothly like Venezuela, that's already proven not to be true. And I think Trump just sort of realized that everything the Israelis have told me have turned out not to be accurate. I'm not saying the Israelis purposely lied to the president, but they probably did, if we're being honest. But I'm not saying that. I would never accuse the Israelis of being a dishonest group of people. Of course not. No anti-Semitism for me, folks. But I think the president, at least I hope the president realized the Israelis are, at the very least, their assessments have proven to be false. Whether they've made them in good faith or not, who knows. And I think that's why the president was and I think that's why he made the post starting to annihilate Iran to put pressure on them to agree to a ceasefire. And thankfully Pakistan and I think China helped push Iran to agree to a temporary 2-week ceasefire. So that was good progress, but then, we actually have the negotiation, and I didn't expect the deal to happen in the first round of negotiation, but, J.D. Vance had a press conference at the end of the 21 hours, and J.D. Vance kept focusing on no nuclear weapon. And folks, here's the deal. This is the truth. There is no direct evidence that Iran was actively trying to create a nuclear weapon. That their intent was to create a nuclear weapon. In fact, Tulsi Gabbard, who's the head of intelligence, okay? She's the head of national intelligence. She's, NID, National Intelligence Director. She said last year that there was no intelligence saying that Iran was actively looking to build a nuclear weapon. Now, you could argue that Iran has the incentive to get a nuclear weapon, and they certainly do now after this war. So you could argue whether or not there's direct evidence that the incentive is so obvious that they're probably at some level, and they're clearly, implying, they're trying to, imply sort of implicitly to the United States and the world that they have the ability to make a nuclear weapon because they've been enriching to 60%. Once Trump left the JCPOA, they were enriching around 3%, which 3% is for civilian purposes, and that's what the Obama deal had them. They couldn't go higher than that. Trump leaves the JCPOA, and then Iran starts enriching to 60% or more. And that was sort of a taunt. And that was Iran basically saying, hey, look, if you're going to pull out of this deal, that's fine, but we're going to start enriching to higher levels. And Iran was sort of playing a game, and it was for leverage. What they were basically doing for the last few years, especially with the Biden administration, it was, we're not committing to making a nuclear weapon, but we're going to enrich to a level for where if we chose to make a nuclear weapon, it would be quite easy. It's sort of a game of cat and mouse, almost, that the Iranians have been doing. They didn't want to go full North Korea because they feared, and I think evidence proves that if they did commit to making a nuclear weapon, they'd be attacked. They were attacked anyway, so that fear is sort of moot. But they didn't want to do what Gaddafi did and give up all basically their defenses and all their nuclear capabilities, only for later to Gaddafi be, he was sodomized to death by U.S. backing. We totally turned on it, even though Gaddafi did everything we wanted him to do in Libya. He was so afraid of George W. Bush, he thought, this crazy cowboy's insane, I better do what he wants. And he did do what we wanted, and we still overthrew him, and he was sodomized to death by the uprising in Libya. And Libya is still basically in a state of civil war. That country's never recovered. So Iran didn't want to be like Gaddafi, but they didn't want to antagonize the West too much where they would be attacked. So they were playing this game like we're enriching higher than civilian purposes, but we're not committing to making a nuclear weapon, so you don't have the justification to attack us. And the Biden administration, they did negotiate with the Iranians, but they didn't attack them either. So the game worked with the Biden administration. Obviously, the game did not work with the Trump administration. And Trump and the Israelis attacked. And I think it was a very dumb decision by the Trump administration. But, the Iranians were enriching at a level that was higher than for civilian purposes. So it did give the United States and the Israelis somewhat of a pretext. I want to be fair here. I don't want to say, the United States bad, Israel bad, and act like Iran's this here. They're not a good country. They treat their people terribly. I don't think they killed 40,000 of their own people like people are claiming, when the protests were happening a few months ago. I think that there's no actual evidence that they killed 40,000 of their own, or even 30,000 of their own people. I think maybe at most 10,000. But still, that's a ridiculous number. It's not a good regime. And the women are treated horribly. Everyone understands that Iran is, and we don't want countries getting nuclear weapons. The United States is against nuclear proliferation as a policy. We don't want any countries we don't even want allies getting nuclear weapons. And we certainly don't want a country that has shown hostility towards us to get a nuclear weapon. So I understand the thinking of it, but I don't support regime change because I don't think it works. I think ultimately Trump should not have left the JCPOA, the Obama nuclear deal, back in his first term. I think that was a mistake. Totally fine with renegotiating a better deal. The JCPOA had a lot of problems. I think at a minimum, the JCPOA should have said, if you're going to enrich uranium, you can't do it in Iran. I mean, there are other Middle Eastern countries that are allowed to enrich, but the uranium itself is not in their own countries. It has to be outside of their countries, so we can better monitor it. I think at the very least that should have been in the original JCPOA. It wasn't. Now, countries have a right to enrich in their own countries. There's no international law that prevents them. But if we're going to negotiate with another country, we can set up our own standards, right? And I think that was a reasonable standard. The Obama administration, and obviously the Iranians wouldn't agree to that. Maybe they would agree to it now, but the point is, there are ways in theory to make a better JCPOA, and I think that's the best way to go. But going to war with Iran was a mistake. So I'm happy to hear that maybe, look, we don't need a deal with Iran. I think at this point, Trump can just say, we met our military goals. We're energy independent. Yeah, prices are going to be up for a while, but it's Iran's fault, not my fault. We decimated them. They're years away from being able to get a nuclear weapon now. Job is finished. No more war. At the very least, Trump should do that. And I think maybe we're seeing signs of it. But, this had a cost. This war had a cost. Regardless, there's no, you can't recover fully from this war. And we've seen that. Trump recently went after Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Alex Jones, Candace Owens. these have been Trump backers for years, especially in the case of Alex Jones and Tucker and Candace. Megyn was a little iffy during the first couple of years of Trump. Famously, she had the question to Trump, basically accusing Trump of being a sexist, and Trump, hit that question out of the park. But Megyn became a big supporter. Megyn was at Trump's rallies toward the end of the 24 campaigning for Trump. So all these people were allies, and Trump just attacked them on True Social this past weekend, viciously. He attacked Tucker for not finishing college. It was ridiculous. And I understand a lot of people on the right, a lot of conservatives don't like some of the criticism that has come towards Trump from people like Tucker, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, Alex Jones. But look, and I know people dispute this to how much Trump campaigned on being anti-war, but for 10 years, Trump's general message on war was no more dumb Middle Eastern wars. Would he use hawkish language for specific examples? Yes. Would he use tough language with Iran, with North Korea? Yes. But the general principle that Trump set up when it came to foreign policy was we have to focus on our own problems, not the rest of the world's problems. That's why he's been so hostile towards NATO. And yes, Trump would use harsh language sometimes like he did with North Korea, but it actually ended with at least some détente. We didn't get a full deal with North Korea, but we had better relations during Trump's first term, certainly than we had before Trump was in office. Even though Trump was talking about how he had a bigger button than Kim Jong-un. I have a bigger button and mine works, unlike the North Koreans. Make America great again. So, great. I didn't say gay. Great again. I already just want to clarify. So yes, at times Trump did use some harsh rhetoric, even toward Iran during the campaign, but oftentimes that was seen as a negotiation because Trump had been very wary of getting us involved himself in a war. He didn't pull us out of some wars that previous presidents got us into, but he himself had not fully engaged us in the war like he did with Iran back in February. And there are political consequences for that, and yeah, the right is not unified. The coalition has broken a little bit. I don't think you can repair it to win the midterms. I mean, the House is gone. The Senate will be, I think we'll keep the Senate, but it's going to be very close. It might be a 50-50 Senate. We'd keep it in that scenario because Vice President Vance would be the tiebreaker. But it's going to be dicey. The Senate's going to be dicey. Now, I do think you can rebuild the coalition for 2028 because I think the Democrat Party, I think the bench is pretty overrated. I see people saying they have this great bench. I think the bench is not so great. Gavin Newsom, I don't see him having any appeal in the Midwest. Maybe Josh Shapiro because of Pennsylvania, obviously, but, the anti-Israel sentiment is probably still, broadly speaking, stronger on the left, and I think for good reasons. I'm not a fan of Israel, for those listening for that, and I think people know this if you listen to me. I'm not a big fan. And I think a lot of people on the right aren't a fan of Israel anymore because a lot of people think Israel keeps us getting involved in their own wars. But the anti-Israel sentiment is higher, I think stronger on the left still. So can Josh Shapiro, who is Jewish, and that matters here, can he really be the nominee? I'm not sure. Pete Buttigieg is gay, so I don't know how that's going to play nationally. I know that's kind of harsh to say, but that's a real thing people have to consider. Are we going to, I'm not so sure. I mean, he is from Indiana, but is this Pete Buttigieg who comes across as sort of a Whole Foods liberal who's gay, he can have a lot of appeal in Scranton, Pennsylvania? I don't know. So I don't think 2028 is doomed for Republicans. But I do think this war does mean the House is gone. It's going to be a blowout. And the Senate's going to be close. And the Senate shouldn't be close because the map is favorable to us. We should be able to pick up maybe a New Hampshire, maybe a Georgia. We should be able to keep Maine, but I think we're going to lose all those seats because the electoral environment's going to be rough because the economy got worse because of this war. There's no question about it. I mean, I live in California. There have been days where gas prices are over $6 a gallon. It's insane. And granted, we're worse off because we have this ridiculous, retarded governor, Gavin Newsom, but I'm still an American. I still have to pay these prices whether I live in California. That's where I live. And the prices were lower before this war started, so the price increases because of the war. I was already paying too high a price of gas. Trump made it worse for me. I'm not happy. I support Trump. I don't hate him. But I'm not happy about that. I don't make a lot of money. I'm not happy about that. So there's a consequence for doing what Trump did, and we're going to feel it. We're feeling it now because there is a fractioning of the coalition. Young people are not happy with the administration. His approval rating is quite low, basically where he was for much of his first term, low 40s. which is not ideal. And it is a recipe for being wiped out in the midterms. So I think if we pull out now, we can totally save 2028. I think J.D. Vance or whoever the Republican has a fighting chance. But this war, I think, did mean that the midterms were over. I think the midterms are over. So, but we'll see. You got to vote, folks. That's why we play the game. That's why you play the game. You never know. You got to vote. Democrats did much better in 2022 than people expected. So maybe Republicans could do the same. That's why you have to vote. And hopefully the administration can start focusing more on domestic issues instead of Israeli pet projects like destroying the whole Middle East. And we'll see what happens. Anyway, folks, that's it for today. Thanks for listening. Again, please subscribe, whether on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. I greatly appreciate it. And if you are listening on the YouTube, like and comment. It helps a great deal. And by the way, I hope you enjoyed the debate I had with my friend Nicholas. It did pretty well, a lot of comments. I appreciate the feedback. And maybe we'll do more debates because you guys seem to like it. So we'll see what happens in the future. He's a good debate partner. Sometimes he's a little autistic in the way he frames certain things, but that's okay. He's lovable. We love him anyway. That's why we love him. Because of this, the artistic nature. He tries to find contradictions that don't exist. It's remarkable, actually. Anyway, I hope he's not listening. Anyway, folks, have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.